Hi everyone, welcome to this afternoon's presentation from Jo from Good for the Hood, and she's presenting as part of our Lunchtime Learning series, which is on the organised kitchen and storage hacks. And this is part of 3 other ones that have also been presented, and we have recordings of those that we can also send to you, and they're also on our brand new workshops YouTube channel. So if you go to Hunters Hill Council on YouTube, you can watch all of these workshops as well. So I'm going to hand over to Jo for this afternoon's presentation, and thank you everyone for coming.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, and thanks to Hunters Hill Council for, as Gabby said, now this is the 4th of our sessions that we've been running with your community, and it's been a lot of fun, even remotely. Yeah, certainly encourage you to check out some of the other workshops as well that we have run. Today is talking all about food. It's either going to make you really hungry or put you off food for a while, or something in between. Such as the nature of talking about storing food, is that we're going to be talking a lot about spoiling food and how we get there. I am Jo Torrento. I'm an educator who lives in Ryde, and sustainability education and community engagement is my passion. I'm had 20 years in healthcare and the environment, and the last few years I've been working with Good for the Hood, and that leads us to do all sorts of crazy things, like talk about food and mold and compost and worms and all the glamorous things which I never thought I would be end up doing. But thank you for joining us today. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Wallumattagal, as are you if you're in Hunters Hill, on the Eora, and I'm edging onto the Darug Nations. And I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past and present. And let's get started. If you joined us last week when we talked a bit about buying food better and food waste as a problem, we talked a bit about the scale of food waste in Australia. So I'm just going to recap quickly so that you understand why we're bothering talking about this stuff. Is it a small issue? Is it just something that we're not particularly good at, but it's not a big deal? Actually, it's a huge issue. Food waste as a country, if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. 8% of our global greenhouse gases comes from food waste alone. And we have 1/3 of the food that's grown and created on planet Earth ends up going back into the earth uneaten. And on top of that, we have huge hunger and food security issues in Australia. You've never seen more services stretched when it comes to OzHarvest and Food Bank and food support charities in Sydney and around Australia through COVID. Hunger is an issue, even in a very advanced and wealthy nation such as Australia. So if we've got a problem, and we have a problem, everywhere in the world has a problem. And in fact, Australians are unfortunately some of the more wasteful people in the world when it comes to food. And that's because we have an abundance of fresh food at our fingertips. But food is so much more than just what we eat. It's a beautiful emotional connection that we have. It's sometimes a strained relationship we have with it. It's certainly something that we use to show love, to care, to create, to celebrate. It is so wrapped up in our day-to-day life. And when we waste food, we waste so much more than just the nutrients in it. So we know when we're looking at the scale of food waste that a huge percentage of it, over 1/3, is being lost in our homes, which is why we're talking today about how it gets wasted. Some of it happens at the growth and sale of food, but 1/3 of food is getting to our homes after the long journey of being grown and shipped around, and then it's actually ending up in the bin. So you think about the waste that goes into the whole cycle of food and that whole supply chain, just for it to go back uneaten. So it's a real challenge for us today to think about how we might play a role in storing food in better ways so that we don't waste it before we get a chance to eat it. Now we know that a large percentage in the last Rubber Bank, they do an annual food waste survey, 3/4 of people were saying that food is wasted in their home because they don't get a chance to eat it before it goes off. So when you look at the #1 reason that food is wasted, it is because it spoils. So today is all about stopping that spoiling and looking at ways that we can stop food going bad before we can eat it. Last week, I talked a lot about the fact that reducing food waste does come back to a mindset first and foremost. If we don't think this is an important issue, and if you don't see the value in food, and that if you don't try, we actually can't change the issue. So today is about compelling you to think differently about how you might manage things at home. Try a few new things at home. If you have particular areas of food that you see, it always goes bad. Doesn't matter what I do, it is going bad. Perhaps we'll help you unpack why it is. And ultimately, the question today is, if you cannot store the food appropriately enough for you to use it, then you're either buying too much or you're storing it incorrectly. So if you can't store it and it's still going off, then you need to be shopping more frequently. That's what it comes down to. So a lot of what we talk about is strategy and habits. And today we're going to be giving you some examples of particular food groups and how we can use our kitchen to help those food groups stay fresh longer. So last week we also talked about buying better and planning your meals. Today we're talking almost exclusively about food storage, because it's such a huge issue and there's such a gamut of information and so many factors we have to think about. Some people think it's just about putting it in the cupboard and getting it when you need it. We need to understand food better if we want to store it better. Now, food storage has been something that as human beings have had to grapple with for the entirety of humanity. We know that if we haven't been able to secure food in the same way all year round and we want to store it, then we need to find a way to keep it fresh. If we can't get food for a period of time because we're cut off from the food source because of weather or seasons, we need to keep a way of keeping food fresh. So almost every culture on earth has had a tradition of food storage or food preservation. And it's quite a fascinating place to go into, because you realize that whilst we have all of the technology at our fingertips, that where there's a strategy and approach that can work, that other cultures have avoided food waste for a very long time. And perhaps it's because we have it so easy that we've got a little bit complacent. So this is an Afghan method of storing grapes. They have been able to store grapes, and still do, in clay and straw in canjinas to keep grapes fresh for up to 6 months at a time in Afghanistan, one of the hottest places on earth. So that is what this gentleman is doing there. And each of those clay covers contains bunches of fresh grapes that have just been picked, and they will stay stored and then opened as they're required. This is bakwa. This is a Chinese salted meat. And this is made and sold in Singapore, and you'll get it, you might be able to get it in parts of Sydney as well. But this is used in celebrations, and it is a very processed meat which has stayed cured under using salts and sugars to keep it fresh, or fresh enough to eat anyway, stop it from going bad. The Korean kimchi, the fermented pickle using cabbage and chili, was traditionally fermented in the ground using these vats. Now you'll see people making it at home, and you can buy it at Harris Farm. But traditionally it was a process to keep those vegetables, carrots, cabbage, in a way that can be used all year round and for an extended period of time as well. We know that Aboriginal cultures have used lots of different ways of farming and agriculture as well, and that they were storing berries, fruits in hollows of trees and wrapped up in bags for extended periods. And I saved you a picture, but also, hang on, let's go back here. One of the other cultures, on Inuit cultures as well, were also preserving seabirds within the carcasses of animals. I didn't put a photo in there for that one. So there's been ways that people have had to learn to cure foods. And then as we've headed into space, we've needed to have ways of preserving and storing food as well. So this is a day's meal under in space. So you've got steak and biscuits and trail mix and M&Ms, and they're all vacuum packed to go into space. In Australia, colonial history, we've had beef jerky, we've had ways of storing. We had this house when I moved in the 60s had an old airing cupboard in the garage where meat was hung and kept. We've had powdered milk and condensed milk. Anzac biscuits were evolved because they stored longer. They didn't have as many ingredients which would spoil, so they could be sent on boats to get to soldiers. Long life milk products and the evolution of food packaging as well have all come because we want food to stay in a form that we can use it before it goes off. So a long history has existed around food storage, and if anything, we're in a place where we store food better than we ever have. But I think because of the abundance of food we have and the different produce we have and the size of our kitchens and our fridges sometimes makes food storage really challenging for people. So why does food go bad? Good food goes bad because it was a living entity and we have taken it away from its lifeline. Good food goes bad because it is dying, and time will take it into a place where it will decompose eventually. But the reasons that food itself starts to decompose are accelerated by a number of natural processes. And I'll go through each of those in a second. They can broadly be grouped into these categories. And the reason we store food is to avoid all of these things or to inhibit these natural processes as much as possible while still keeping the food edible. We could do a whole bunch of things to food to store it, but it would be completely inedible. So it's about keeping it safe and also able to be eaten and tasty as well. The whole idea with food storage as well is that we try to keep the nutrient content as high as possible. So I'm going to share with you some strategies in a little bit that talk about a hierarchy really of approaches to food. We know that the best nutrient density for food comes when food is just picked. And it also comes from things like microgreens and the young growth on plants as well. So food is better when it's fresher. And the higher density of nutrients is in food that has little to no cooking processes and is raw and kept as much as possible with certain fresh foods. So the challenge is, how do we stop all these other things impacting it? And food storage is really a race against time, as I said. So when food is harvested or manufactured or butchered, the cells in that living organism are starting to break down. Most food that stays longer on our shelves, of fruit and vegetables, have really thick cell walls, so they can keep their skin, and they've got their own sort of natural packaging, which will keep it as fresh as possible for as long as possible. But we all know that feeling when food is starting to go bad. It starts to smell, it looks different, its texture changes, it might go weird colors, weird patterns, it gets that soggy disgustingness about it. Bad food makes us feel very, very viscerally unwell, and that's a deliberate response because we're protecting our response to food. We don't want humans to eat bad food. We know that there are a very large amount of things that can make us unwell. So that visceral reaction to which we have to bad food going off is a protective mechanism. And it's to protect us from things like microorganisms. So we know bacteria and fungi are the two things that mainly grow on food. And you'll hear all sorts of things, bacteria like salmonellas and listerias, I know when, if you've ever been pregnant or you've lived with a pregnant woman, very, very cautious about what they eat and how they eat it. We know that fungi can grow on foods, and that hairiness that we can see on cheese and bread and strawberries is a type of mold. We know when something gets yeast on it that it starts to get that very fermented smell, and it can change completely the composition of the food. So we know that microorganisms thrive on food because they like wet, sugary, and warm environments. So that's why we refrigerate food, is because immediately it's taking the temperature right down to make it less favorable for microorganisms to grow. Some microorganisms do not like oxygen. So as soon as you air it or keep it well aired, you will deter it. Some really like oxygen. So if you leave it exposed to air, it will encourage it to grow. But most microorganisms, you will start to see some changes in the food, but not all. So that is why we rely on use by dates to tell us that food may actually be dangerous now to eat. Not to be confused with best before dates, which we talked about last week, which actually just means that the quality of food cannot be guaranteed. So don't get too brazen and ignore the use by dates. They can be there to help you determine that food is actually unsafe now. But don't forget to use your eyes, ears, maybe not ears. If it's knowing it's not fit to be eaten. But use your eyes, particularly touch or smell. And we all have that sense of that metallic, horrible taste too when food has turned. Another reason that food starts to go bad is because of the enzymes within it. Two very common enzymes which you'll hear a lot about when you talk about food spoiling is ethylene, which is that very sweet smelling fruit gas that comes off ripening fruit. And you'll be able to think about it immediately. It's the smell of bananas, it's pineapple when it's ripening, mangoes. That smell, which you can smell particularly in tropical fruits, is called ethylene. Now, it's really good at helping other fruit ripen, and that's why it exists. It's an enzyme that creates a reaction within other fruit, and it will help it all ripen at the same time, which is great because we want ripe fruit. Ethylene can be terrible though if we're trying to prevent other fruit from continuing to ripen. So we're going to be talking about ethylene quite a bit today. The other one is the polyphenol oxidase, which they call PPO, which is the stuff that makes food go brown. So when you chop an apple open and it goes brown, that's PPO. Not dangerous, but we know that it starts to change the way that food presents really quickly. So that's another enzyme. Now, enzymes generally, again, dislike cooler temperatures. We know that in the body, enzymes like a certain temperature around the 37-degree mark. They don't like acidic or highly basic environments. They really like a nice neutral pH. So as soon as you put citric acid or lemon juice on your avocado, that's why it stops going brown. We know that if you get rid of some of the enzymes around the fruit that might, or vegetables that might be sitting on the outside, by blanching it, so by putting it in boiling water before you freeze it, you can stop some of those browning reactions. And we know, as I said, that ethylene is very sensitive. Some fruits are very sensitive to ethylene. So as soon as they smell it, it will start a reaction within them too. So enzymes are amazing, but they will work against us with food storage. Light can be challenging for us as well. We know that because of particularly fruit and vegetables, lights will trigger growth in fruits and vegetables. And that's why we tend to keep the light off in the fridge when the door closes. It's dark in there. We know that our pantries deliberately have a door on there to keep our food in the dark. We don't want light to cause degradation, and we don't want it to trigger that continued growth. We know the more that food grows, so if a celery continues to grow, it pulls nutrients out of the food itself, and it goes into that growth. So light can be damaging as a process for once we have, fruit and vegetables picked. We also don't want direct sunlight on our fruits and vegetables because they can just cause damage and discolorations as well. We also know that if you've ever left butter out in the light, it's actually the light, not the heat, which can turn butter rancid. So, and if you've ever left a potato on the bench and watched what happens to it, as soon as it starts to see light, it's quite a quick reaction and really won't be too long before you're growing a little potato vine on the bench. We know that physical damage is a real contributor to the degradation of food. So as soon as a food is bruised, it triggers a reaction which contributes to other reactions. So breaking down of the cell wall releases more enzymes and creates an environment where microbes can get in. So if you have a bruised or broken piece of fruit or a damaged eggshell or a packaging that's damaged, that will enable a lot quicker, damage to the food. So it's really important also, once that's happened, to get that bad item out of the food. So take out that damaged egg, take away the tomato that's squished, take out the bruised strawberry, because what it will do is create an environment where the rest of the items around it will start to turn as well. And you get a chain reaction of just grossness, because broken cells lead to more damage. And we know that of all the things we've talked about, as soon as you get a couple of these reactions and triggers working together, it speeds up the rate of food spoiling a lot more. Temperatures are also really critical, as we've talked about. Microbes don't like cooler environments, and it slows down the chemical reactions within food. So there's a reason that we keep meat in the fridge, there's a reason we keep dairy in the fridge, and there are a lot of fruit and vegetables which will be much happier in the fridge than anywhere else. Now, in saying that, if we take the temperature down too low and we start to freeze high water, food with high water density or concentration, then you will damage that food and potentially cause more spoiling as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important to keep your fridge and freezer at the right temperature, so that you've got the best chance of keeping things fresh. We know that for every 7-degree change in temperature, the rate of chemical reaction doubles. So every time you could basically double the speed of spoiling by taking it outside the fridge and putting it in just an environment that was 7 degrees warmer, not even room temperature. So you can imagine once you take the milk out into on the bench, why all of a sudden within 12 hours it can really have turned. You are just enabling an environment where the spoiling happens a lot more quickly. Oxygen causes problems. We've just talked about enzyme changes, but we also know that environments which are highly oxygenated or exposed to air can dehydrate fruits and vegetables with water content. It can change completely the way fats present in the fridge. So if you've had food that's exposed to oxygen, meat, you see what it looks like if it's been left. You've seen the edge of the cheese, which starts to harden. We also see that you start to get a lot of changes and odors too when food is exposed to air. So there's a reason that we recommend that with everything that you do, that you have lids on things, that items are sealed. There's a reason things are vacuum packed and canned. It's to stop oxygen getting in there and working against us. And the last of those factors which really act against us when it comes to keeping food fresh is moisture. Now, this is another one which food can be very fickle. A lot of foods love lots of moisture, and without lots of moisture, they really will deteriorate very quickly. And then you've got environments where if you have too much moisture, you're just encouraging mold growth and that food to go very soggy. So you'll see it within products in your pantry. If you get any moisture in there, the texture of grains and legumes and packaged foods can completely go off. There's a reason why a lot of packaged foods give you the silica packages inside, you know, seaweed or nori rolls or rice paper or noodles. They really want to keep it dry, because as soon as moisture gets in there, there's going to be changes to the composition of that food. So they're the things we want to try and be aware of. They're the reasons we store food certain ways. I want to give you now my top tips for the tools that I use in my kitchen to keep food fresh, and that you probably already have and may already use, but these are the things that I think every kitchen needs to have access to. Now, the first thing, and I will say also, I'm a very big fan of using what you already have. So if you have something that's not exactly like this, but works in the same way, fantastic. And I will also say, I actually don't use paper towels in my kitchen, but I know it has a really great purpose for a lot of people. So paper towels and tea towels are two of the things that can be really valuable. One of the reasons they're fantastic is obviously because they help with the reducing the moisture that's freely accumulating in our drawers, in our crisper drawers, and particularly on the shelves. They can act as fantastic buffers to keep food contact with really moist environments. So they can also hold moisture to hold humidity. They can be great to wipe out and, you know, make cleaning up spills in the fridge particularly a lot easier. So I think you can never have too many tea towels or cloths, and you throw them in the wash and reuse them again for exactly those purposes. Big fan of writing on things. If you've got a brain like mine, you can never remember what those frozen things are in the freezer. So the whiteboard marker straight onto Tupperware if you're not precious about it, or if you really want to have a label in your pantry, writing what something is, when you froze it or when it was made, can be really helpful, so that when you pull out that thing that you think is pasta sauce and you realize that actually it's tomato soup or whatever, that you've got a hope of you know, using it in the way that you hoped that it would be used when you froze it in particular. Also, it avoids those terrible mishaps when you're baking, when you put, you know, salt instead of sugar or some of those other items. So definitely label. You know, if it's just you and you've got a pretty good track record with remembering what things are, great. But it doesn't take long, and it certainly will save you a lot of heartache later on. I'm a big fan of jars and using jars because I have them, and I know that they're not highly valuable as a recycled entity in our recycling stream. So I love using large jars, particularly with lids. You would have seen the resurgence of what they call mason jars, or the big jars with lids, perfect for leftovers, perfect to store fresh fruit, as we'll talk about those. They work really well in the freezer as long as you don't overfill them. And the good thing about a clear jar or a clear container is that you can see what it is, and you can see when it's maybe looking like, oh, I've got to use that up. Obviously, everyone has their own favorite Tupperware or decor product or whatever it is. I'm a big fan of, again, using what you have. There's nothing wrong with, you know, Chinese takeaway containers if you've got an abundance of those for freezing items. Nothing wrong with the kids' lunchbox to freeze things in. Use what you have, and you don't have to go out and buy whiz-bang amazing, you know, containers. They also last forever if you do the right thing with them. So, but I'm a big fan, again, of keeping the seals, and if they have vents on them, that can be a really useful solution, and we'll talk about when to use the vents soon. You'll notice that I haven't mentioned Glad wrap or plastic wrap. I don't use it in my kitchen. A lot of people are very passionate about that, and I recognise that it has its place in some people's kitchens. There are many ways around it. If you're a fan of the beeswax wrap, or you've ever made one, or you've got one of those and you want to wrap items in that, that can be fantastic. It is just a way of sealing in moisture, as is a jar and a container. Don't be afraid to put a plate on top of a bowl as a lid too. It works perfectly. That's what Costa Georgiadis does in his fridge. You can avoid, if you're trying to live with less plastics in your world, you can definitely get away without using plastic wrap. 35-year-old Tupperware, can I still use it? I guess you're asking whether it has any nasties in it, possibly BPAs. I would have a good search of that. I know some of the old containers have gone out of fashion, and old pots and pans have gone out of fashion because of leads and heavy metals and stuff. So I would definitely have a look, work out about the approximate circle. I've not heard that old Tupperware was terrible, but someone else might have an opinion on that. I'm trying to think if I've got any old Tupperware that's still digging around. I know my mum has, but it's testament to the fact that it's still kicking on. That's pretty amazing. So I'm not sure. I would check it. I've not heard anything about it being unsuitable for continued use though. All right. My last couple of tips on tools for the trade is keep those silicone packets that come in, cosmetics, food, put them in a jar, put them in your pantry if you're trying to keep away moisture, put them in your fridge if you're wanting to get rid of odors, and they can just be really valuable. They don't need to go in the bin. They're fantastic, and they really do help take away odors and additional humidity if you're trying to keep a drier environment, particularly in the pantry. It is recommended that you look at the temperatures of your fridge, and if you can't tell, a thermometer in the fridge in a couple of different locations, if you can be really useful. First of all, because it will enable you to determine if your fridge is running efficiently. Older fridges are huge suckers of energy in our homes. So if you're thinking about your energy bills, this could be a great place to start. Old fridges are terribly inefficient. And it's one of the appliances, if you've had it for 40, 50 years, that I would thoroughly recommend looking at upgrading. I don't say that very often, but fridges have come a long way and the technology there is pretty amazing. So if you're worried about the fluctuations in temperature, and if you're finding that no matter what you do, the food is still not lasting as long as, what you hear your neighbours or your friends are able to keep there, or if you notice that, definitely look at those temperature fluctuations. In summer, in particular, the fridges can be put under a lot more strain. The other thing I'll say about that in a second when we talk about our fridge is that you need to think about how full it is. Your fridge will work much better when it's about 3/4 full. And we have this really toss up between keeping it full enough to work well and not too full that we can't find anything or that things start to go to waste. But definitely some thermometers will help you monitor what's happening in your fridge. And you can obviously adjust, most fridges will let you adjust the temperature dial. Now, food shouldn't be going frozen in your fridge. If you've got items at the back, particularly when you pull them out, and I had this morning, I pulled out, I'm going away next week, and I pulled my the eggs out, and the fridge is pretty much empty now, and I pulled out a carton of eggs, and 2 eggs at the back were frozen. And my fridge is telling me it's probably a bit too cold. If you turn the temperature down on your fridge, it won't make the food colder more quickly. It's not going to work better or keep your food fresher. It's actually just going to bring it down to a lower temperature. So if it is starting to freeze, or you're noticing some of the vegetables are starting to crystallize, it's too cold. I love brown paper bags. They're great for putting items in to stop that ethylene production and upsetting other things, keeping humidity at the right temperature, and then also, you can throw them in your compost afterwards. I'm also a big fan of having ways of securing your storage. So bulldog clips, or you can get those great plastic, long plastic clips to secure a package up of opened grains, rice, whatever. Using the resealable packaging is great too. Rubber bands, you get them on asparagus and broccolini, just keep them, they can be really handy. And some nice cartons and crates that allow you to separate the vegetables we're going to talk about, that still enable some airflow. So if you've just got dishes which are completely solid at the bottom, sometimes it can encourage that microorganisms and mold and stuff to grow. So if you do allow airflow through, it can be quite handy, particularly with onions and potatoes. All right, so our fridge. We're basically going to talk about these areas of the fridge today. the different shelves, your crisper drawers, the door and the freezer. And then we're going to quickly go through your pantry as well. As I've said, 3/4 full is where you want to be. And the coldest part of your fridge is at the back and at the bottom or just above the crisper. The warmest part of your fridge is the fridge door. And the most humid part of your fridge is the crisper drawer with the vents closed. So when we're going through everything in a second, we're going to allocate items based on that. Also, if you cannot see items because it's so full in your fridge, you are just dicing with food death. Your food will not survive and you will get food loss because you just can't stay on top of it. No one can. So there has to be visibility, and that can be challenging. People like to have a nice full fridge. It feels comforting. But if your fridge is so full that you cannot put items in there, then you need to actually get through some of the food in there. If you're like me and you've got too many condiments, you need to start working through those condiments before you buy any more. No more hot sauce. So the top shelves, I like to make this your use it up, your leftovers shelf. If I don't use you, you're going to end up in the bin shelf. I also like to put eggs up there. Eggs can go further down the shelf as well. It's really, it's a colder part of your shelf. It should be sitting around the 2 to 3 degree mark. Obviously, anything under 4 degrees with your fridge is what you're aiming for. As soon as your fridge is over 5 degrees, that's where listeria likes to grow. So you've got to keep it under 4. And also know that in the fridge door, for example, it is probably going to get warmer in that space. So if the rest of your fridge is 4 degrees, the fridge door is not going to be 4 degrees. The middle shelves are really where things that you're going to use quite frequently, maybe you're ready to eat meals, where your teenagers are going to rifle through. I recommend putting milk. If you're someone who buys 6 litres of milk and you are going to have one open in the door and you'll get through that in the day, and you've got other milk that needs to sit there because you get through a lot of it, think about putting it in the middle shelves. Most people like to put all their milk in the fridge door, but we've already known that it does get over that 4 degree mark. So milk won't keep as long if you keep it in the fridge door. I recognise it is very convenient and also avoids spills though if you keep it in the door once it's open. But if you're finding repeatedly you cannot get through the milk before it goes off, consider keeping it in that middle shelf. Obviously drinks, most people keep some wine or beer in the fridge in that section as well. It's nice constant temperature. Now, a lot of fridges, and this is very old school looking fridge, a lot of fridges now have a chiller box or an item, a drawer that you can pull out and put meats and seafoods in. So the reason that that's great is that it's a lot colder. It's down almost to 0, 1 or 2 degrees. So it's the coldest part of your fridge if you've got a chiller box, and it's absolutely the right place to put meat. So it also, if you're putting it down the bottom or it's in a drawer, it stops drips and contamination of other food. So that's avoiding those salmonellas and bacteria. So you want to keep them. We'll talk quickly about the order in which meats should go. In your door of your fridge, some people don't like putting cheeses there. They like putting it in the middle shelf because it's colder. But we do know that some cheeses actually like to be kept warmer than, than the 2-3 degrees. So I'll let you make that call. Again, if you've got a little compartment that is for cheese or butter, you can stick a little thermometer in there and work out what it is. Certain cheeses like slightly warmer temperatures, harder cheddars or fettas and mozzarella. So if you're a cheese connoisseur and you want to keep your cheeses at maximum temperature, we'll talk a little bit in a second, maximum quality. We'll talk a little bit in a second about some tips there, but also have a look at what temperature it would be kept at if it was still at the cheese makers. Obviously, sauces and condiments and things that are great to keep refrigerated to keep it fresh, but are not going to kill you if you keep it in the fridge door. And open drinks for convenience, champagne or juice is what you'll find in your door. So probably no surprises there for anyone. Where fridges get really confusing for people is those damn crisper drawers. The places where we think, oh, I don't know, I'm just going to throw it all in there, and if it comes out and it makes it out in any fit state, it'll be a miracle. Now, there's a lot of research done in this, and I think it's close to 60% of people have no idea how the crisper drawer works, and it is just some kind of mysticism which is too much for us all. So I'm going to try and demystify it for you. First of all, our crisper drawers, ideally, and everyone's are different, are designed to allow to have some vents open or closed. Now, if they're opening the vents, that's letting the air out and it's creating less humidity in that space. So that's the perfect environment for fruits and from fruits that don't require, you know, they don't mind being a little bit drier. Our vegetables, for example, want to be in the environment with the vent closed. They like that humidity, and they also don't want to be smelling the fruits which are letting off that ethylene. Most vegetables are very ethylene sensitive. If you put a ripening banana next to a lettuce, it is death to that lettuce. So you want to keep your ethylene sensitive veggies and your fruits separate. They have different humidity needs and different sensitivities to ripening. If you can do that, you've gone a long way and better than most people. So that's the space you want to be. I like putting a tea towel down the bottom. I like gently wetting the tea towel and keeping it moist. I also like covering my veggies with, my lettuces and those things with a tea towel. The challenge with that is as soon as you cover it, or you have one of those swag bags, some people have those, or a canvas bag, you can no longer see it. So you just have to be really diligent, making sure that that zucchini comes out just as it's starting to go soggy, and keeping an eye on what goes down the bottom. Now, I would definitely recommend pulling your drawers out every week or every few days and doing a really thorough, all right, so you can avoid that, you know, the buildup of maybe some molds at the bottom, because we know that once something starts to go bad, it's just a slippery chain reaction of grossness. So you really want to stay on top of that fridge hygiene, and definitely having tea towels or paper towel at the bottom will help you wipe it out, give it a clean and start again. Now your freezer, the other thing I'll say to you, if you have a fridge that has drawers, and some of them do, and you can look down on it, that's fantastic. There are lots of different ways you can stay on top of your fridge drawers. You actually have pretty good visibility because you can see everything in there, but you can write on top of the lids or containers that way. And obviously, if you've got several different fridge drawers at different temperatures, just adapting based on what we've said as well. So freezers are really the places for the food that we could not save first round. It's the place where food goes to give us a second shot, but it only works if you give that food a second shot. So you must eat from your freezer, pull it out, stick it in your use it up shelf, that top shelf, and cook from it. Defrosting on the bench is dangerous because it's really bringing it to a temperature which bacteria can grow. So defrost in the freezer, on paper towel or tea towel if you're worried about some liquid. And then obviously it's for other things which cannot be kept at a quality that would be okay at room temperature or in fridge. So your ice creams and your desserts and your frozen meals. Now, there's lots and lots of information, and this is just from the CSIRO, about how long food can stay in the fridge and what the ideal temperature is. This is based on safety. So if you know that you can't eat certain foods within that time, you need to find a plan B. It needs to be frozen, or it needs to be cooked and frozen, or it needs to be given to someone, or you need to buy less next time. You know, we really know that foods have slightly different requirements for temperature, but really, you know, within 2 to 3 days, most foods, particularly on this list, and particularly when we're looking at meats and seafoods, they need to go. So the freezer is your friend, and use it wisely. Now, pantries are just a whole nother world for people, and people get really excited about those pantry videos and photos of people with these glamorous pantries. I don't care what your pantry looks like, as long as you can see where stuff is. So lighting is your friend. If you don't have a light in your pantry, could I recommend that you get one or get some strip lighting so that you can see what you're dealing with? It is so hard to manage food waste if you can't see things. You've got a light in your fridge and people are really good, but people go into their pantries and they're fumbling around looking for things. So make sure it's well lit in there. Make it easier for yourself. The things you use every day, front and center, the things that might be a bit dangerous or you don't want the kids to see, high. And then places for the items which need darkness but don't need the fridge. And we'll talk about those in a second. But your potatoes, onions, bread, if you're keeping it, you know, on the outside the fridge, freezer. And then once opened items have been opened, like pulses or grains or cereals, what's your plan for that? Because we know that as soon as you've got an open package in the pantry, you are encouraging, you know, potentially pantry moths or cockroaches or weevils to come in if you have lots of them. And once you've got them, they are an absolute nightmare to get rid of. So putting opened items into containers which are labeled so you can access those. All right, so stay with me on this one. When food arrives in your house, you want to use it as quickly as possible in the freshest form. Salads, fresh fruit, meat that's cooked, you know, fresh seafood that's raw. You really want to do minimal stuff to it. It's as fresh as it's going to get in your house. So when you bring something, a fresh produce in, that's the ideal moment to use it as it was harvested. Once you can't, you know, use it that way, or you just want to do something different with it, that's when we talk about standard meal preparation, you know, steak and veg, stir fry, or freezing it. I know that I can't eat this steak and I don't want to eat it in the next 3 days, so I'm putting it in the freezer. Once food has stayed to a point where you're like, it's not as good as it was 2 days ago, 3 days ago, but I've got to use it up. That's when you can start to explore some other ways of using produce. And it's really great for vegetables in particular. It's a bit wonky. It's a bit soggy. It's not as good as it was. Stewing, baking, currying, slow cooking items, making soups, stews, stocks, purees, and then also freezing the leftovers from that for your next meal. A great option. It's not as fresh or tasty or maybe aesthetically as pleasing as it was, but still makes a great meal. Once you've gone past that point and you haven't used the food and it is really starting to look like it's make or break time, still safe to eat, but my goodness, it's you know, that's when you can really start to get quite creative. You can put items in the oven and dehydrate them. You can make kale chips and potato skins and put them in the oven. You can dehydrate fruit. You can preserve things if you're really into canning or pickling or fermenting. It's a whole other world of using up items, particularly if you've got a large volume of them. Or if you've got a piece of meat that's, you know, seen better days, smoking it, or, you know, drying that is a great option as well. You have to get creative at that point, or you know it is bye-bye. Once it's turned and once it's gone to a point you can no longer use it, there's only really a few things left you can do. The most sustainable options are to not just put it in your bin. If you have an animal and that animal is able to eat that piece of meat, great great option. If you have a bokashi bin and you can put those items in, and that's a kind of type of Japanese composting of fermentation, meat products and breads and pastas and stuff can go in there, and you can compost at home. After that, it really needs to go into either curbside food waste FOGO, if you have it, which you don't in Hunters Hill at the moment, but you do have a mixed waste processing. So all the food that goes into your red bin in Hunters Hill goes to a processing plant, and there is a resource recovery for organics in that. So it doesn't just go and buried in the ground. Is it better than using the food as it should have been used? No, absolutely not. There's a cost there environmentally and socially. So, but that is where it should go. All right, so here's some tips about storing items at the best possible freshness so that you can use it, hopefully, in its freshest form, or if not, in ways that will keep it longer. And I'm going to run through these quite quickly. Everyone has their own little takes on these. Some people will have tips and ideas. If you've got some and you want to share them, by all means. Berries and grapes are very fickle. They are very ethylene sensitive, so they respond really strongly to that ripening smell. And they also like their own humidity and their own temperature. So berries and grapes like to be kept in their own little ecosystem. The best way that I've seen to do that is to wash them, lie them out on paper towel or tea towel and dry them, and then put them into an airtight container like a jar. Blueberries with a lid, raspberries with a lid, strawberries with a lid, and grapes with a lid. Not together, keep them separate. One of the things that can be done to keep them really fresh, because often you'll still get some mold growth in those. You dry them, but you might still start to see that white or black mold, is that you can actually put them in a dilute vinegar bath, which will take off those mold spores, which are on the outside of the fruit. That's why we've washed them. But sometimes it's not enough to get rid of it. So if you add a 1/4 cup of vinegar to a cup of water and gently wash them for about 5 minutes and then drain them and rinse them, that will keep them at a really fantastic freshness and stop that, deter that mold from growing. They can stay in that environment for quite some time. Now, the other thing is, if you don't want to go through that process and you know you're going to get through them in the next few days, is the little containers that berries come in are actually their own little ecosystem. So if you don't want to do anything and you just want to keep it, it actually has generally, particularly blueberries, a little moisture space at the bottom, and it's got its own little lid. Sometimes it's got holes in it, but that's pretty good at keeping its freshness. But this is the gold standard, I would say, for keeping berries and grapes. Bread is something that we love to eat fresh. We know that it gets to a point where it's only good for toast. Then it gets to a point where we don't know what it's good for anymore. So storing bread in a bread bag or a bread box or a plastic bag that it comes in, fine. Recognize that after a couple of days, you are going to be looking at potential mold growth. Some bread goes really quickly. Some bread can last a week. I like to just keep it out of the fridge for as long as possible. And then if I know that it's just going to be used for toast for my kids, I'll put it in the fridge. As soon as you put bread in the fridge though, it goes hard, loses that freshness, and it's not as great for sandwiches. Good for toasties, good for toast. But if you want to keep it fresher so that you can pull it out and still use it for sandwiches, pop it in the freezer and then defrost it it's nowhere near as good as fresh bread, but it is better. Now, if you have a baguette and you buy one of those, or really crusty, beautiful bread that has gone so hard that you could hit someone with it, that's the perfect kind of bread to revive. Now, one of the really great ways you can do that is to immerse it in some fresh water for a period, not too long. You don't want it to go soggy. And then put it in the oven. Put it in a slow oven, and it actually will revive that bread to an edible form again. Other than that, you can smash it up for croutons, you can puree it into breadcrumbs, and you can freeze the croutons or the breadcrumbs. But you can bring bread back. The crustier, the better. You can bring it back. Greens. So as soon as you have leafy greens like celery, and they're continuing to keep those leaves, you'll find that they will actually pull the nutrients out. So trimming off those greens can be great. You can stand greens in water, they love it. Trim off the base and put them in some fresh water, and they can actually stand up in your fridge if you've got enough height. But they love that high humidity. They need to be in the crisper with the vent closed. They do not want to be near any ripening fruits, and they do not want any sunlight. Once you've trimmed off the edges, I love putting, green onions or shallots in their roots in a glass of water and then putting them in my garden. They grow again. You can trim them. You've got shallots for life. You can regrow celery if you want to too, just by taking the base off and planting that. But you can use all of those pieces in stock. Stick them in a slow cooker or in a pan, in a pot with some water, and boil them slowly with other pieces of carrot. Makes amazing vegetable stock. Leafy greens and herbs, wash them out, lie them on a tea towel and roll them up. It will keep them fresh for 2 weeks. Elastic bands on the end. It is the perfect environment. It keeps them fresh. It keeps them away from mold. And you know that basil that lasts a day in your fridge at home, you'll have beautiful basil to continue to use. It just needs really that perfect environment of humidity and no mold. Cheese, as I said, have a look at the type of cheese. Is it in a water? Is it a feta or a mozzarella? You probably need to change the water if you've opened it, and you can just top that up with fresh water. Or, you know, if it's a harder cheese and it doesn't mind being in a slightly warmer temperature, the door is fine. Some people recommend keeping cheeses in the crisper because it is a bit cooler. But you know, it really depends on the cheese and how long you want to keep it. If you're someone who buys huge slabs of French cheese, then you probably need a solution to keep it fresh. As we've talked about, pantry items, their biggest problem is infestation or moisture. So you can keep those silica packets, keep a lid on it, label them, and keep them in jars and containers. You do not want infestation. And once there is infestation, you have to get rid of it. You cannot bring it back from the dead once it's got pantry moths or something else. Now, the fruit that causes the biggest dramas for other fruit and vegetable is bananas. Bananas are like the most annoying fruit when it comes to upsetting fruits and vegetables, because they're highly ethylene sensitive, but they also don't like being near other things that are ripening. And they also don't want to be, you know, in an environment with a closed vents. So they need to be on their own. Just give bananas their own space, give them their own area. Do not put them in a fruit bowl with all your other fruit. You will have very, very brown bananas. So they need their own little space. I keep them in the pantry in their own little area, a bit higher than some of the other potatoes and stuff, and in a container again with a good airflow. Bananas freeze amazingly. Peel them, put them in a container and put them in the freezer. Use them in smoothies, use them in banana bread, puree them to make that nice cream, you know, just beautiful pureed frozen banana. It's delicious. You should never lose a banana. Bananas are such amazing things. Even when they're brown, they can be frozen and used in cooking. Banana cakes are meant to be made with really gooey bananas. So keep them peeled and put them in the freezer. Don't let bananas go bad. The other thing is the banana skin makes a great tonic. If you can put it into a jar with a lid with some water, put that in your fridge. The potassium out of that will go into the water and you can pour it on your house plants. They love it. It'll just a couple of days in bananas in the water, and it's a really great way. And then put your banana skins into the compost or into the garden. Now, cold climate fruits like your apricots and your berries and your plums and your apples really like to be in the crisper with the vent open. They are going to produce lots of ethylene, but once they're in the fridge, they've kind of ripened as much as they're going to. So if you want them to ripen a bit more, like if you've got some plums which have come and they're a bit hard, put them in a brown paper bag in a cool area without too much sun, and then pop them in your crisper drawer with the vent open, and that will mean that they've ripened, but they're not going to go to that point of gooiness. Keep them all away from citrus. They don't play well with citrus, again, because they interact with each other. Citrus do better if you can keep them in another zone. That can be problematic if you've only got one crisper drawer. We'll talk about citrus in a sec. Nearly there, guys, too. I know you've getting tight on time. That is not citrus fruits. That's meant to be tropical fruits, sorry. So they like slightly warmer temperatures. They will ripen outside the fridge. So I know we all have our avocados, which we have on the bench to ripen. Once they've ripened, get them in the fridge. And again, they will be happy if they can stay in the crisper drawers with the vents open. They will also tolerate staying on the bench for a lot longer. So pineapples, again, will stay out on the bench and ripen, but the longer you leave it out there, the more risk that it will over ripen. One of my nice little tips with avocado, with dip, when you make it, or when you've had half the avocado, you'll obviously leave the pit in there. That's what will stop the oxidation from progressing to that point where it's just all disgusting and brown. And you can rub some oil on the outside of the avocado if you don't want to use plastic wrap. Or you can just put it in a Tupperware container and gently take off that top layer, but it would stay when you're ready to use it. But keep the pit in there. Keep the pit in your guacamole when you're serving it at a party. It stops it going brown. I haven't looked up what that reaction is yet, but it's magic as far as I'm concerned. Citrus fruits will stay in the fridge. Generally, you can keep them in another area of the fridge, or in the crisper drawer with the vent open if it's not going to upset any of your other fruits. They're also temperamental. But again, keep them away from those cold climate fruits because they will accelerate the ripening. Vegetables in general, all other veggies apart from the leafy green ones, they like being in your crisp drawer with the vents closed. They like being away from anything that's producing ethylene. They like humidity. They like some moisture. They like being covered up and wrapped up with a tea towel that's moist. Your eggplants and zucchinis and green beans are the ones that tend to go off a little bit more quickly. That's because they actually like it slightly warmer. So if you're finding they're going off really quickly, it might be that your crisper drawer is just a little bit too cold for them. Carrots and celery love water. If you've got a soggy carrot and you put it in a glass of water or a jar with water, it will come back like a brand new carrot. It is amazing. If you cut up carrot sticks and celery sticks for a party, put them in a dish full of water and put them in the fridge until you're ready to serve. They will be so crunchy. Keep your mushrooms in a paper bag. They like their own little place. Again, they're very fickle and they like their own humidity. They don't like being too wet and soggy. And tomatoes, really, they don't like being in the fridge. Again, we put them in there to stop them over ripening, but the flavors in tomatoes are lost as soon as you pop them in the fridge. So if you can keep them on the bench, they will taste infinitely better. Eggs, we've talked about that. They like to be keep them in the carton they came in. A lot of people like putting them in the carton itself. Will keep odors away and also provides a bit of protection if someone bumps the fridge or something, and get rid of any that have broken or been damaged. You can freeze milk. If anyone ever panics that it's on the way out, you can pop it in there. Is it as good to drink? Maybe it's lost a bit of its quality, but dairy is very, very freezable. Cream, yogurt can all be frozen to be used. Again, keep it in the middle shelf if you want to keep it more than 3 days. Root veggies, they need a really dark place. They don't like to be kept in airtight environments. They like a bit of airflow. They also like humidity, potatoes, which is annoying because onions don't. But if you've got a potato and it started to shoot, just peel it. Those eyes can be pushed off. It's not going to cause a problem. There is a substance called solanine, which can upset, which creates the greenness in potatoes, which can be quite toxic. So if your potato's gone green and you're really uncertain, I wouldn't risk it too much, but you can peel it. I certainly have peeled potatoes and they've been fine underneath before. But if it tastes bitter at all, you shouldn't be eaten. Keep them away from onions, and you can store them with ginger. They don't mind that. You can also store them with apples, because something about apples stops potatoes sprouting. So if you've got a bunch of apples which you're going to get through and you don't want to put in the fridge, and you've got a bunch of potatoes which are starting to grow, stick them with the potatoes for a bit. It'll inhibit that. So much to know. Onion and garlic, absolutely fine together. Keep them away from potatoes. Can also be stored with ginger. The ginger can go in the fridge as well. And again, they need to be in your pantry as well. Lots of airflow and just separated from your potatoes. The order for meat in your fridge: seafood at the top, down to poultry, and that's purely about contamination. If you're getting some drips coming through, we're going to get less bacterial contamination from the seafood and the most from the poultry. Portion them up before you put in the freezer. So if you've got sausages and you know you're only going to eat 4 at a time, separate them up. And keep your bones. Never, if you've never made stock from bones, it's such an easy thing. Put them in with some of the veggie scraps you've got. Cook them up. If you've got a bokashi bin at home, you can throw your bones in that after and put it in your compost. If you don't, obviously the cooked bones go into your bin. But proteins keep really well in the freezer, as you know. Just make sure that you protect them from freezer burn. All right, so I'm going to take any questions now. I will just throw you with a little tip. If you're one of those people who are really struggling in this space, I've been working with this wonderful woman for some time. Her name is Sally Flower. She lives in Melbourne and she's a professional organizer, and she's also a sustainability advocate. And she has always said that we really need to think about how we want our kitchen to work. A lot of people just have too much stuff in their kitchens to stay on top of it, and it becomes this immense burden. We need to get through this and we've got to eat that, and it's, oh, the less you have in your kitchen, that goes for your bench and your spaces, the easier it is to manage and the less food that will go to waste. So something to take into account. We don't need more burdening us. And also, she's a big fan of not overfilling our pantries, because again, we just get lost in all of that. All right. Do I like storage jars that have metal seals and clips with the rubber seal? I know the ones. Yeah, look, I think storage jars which seal enough are fine. I know that there are different types of jars, and a lot of those jars came from the days of canning and preserving. I have no problem with it. It's all about keeping a secure seal to stop air getting in. I've seen them break a lot, so I tend to just use the Passata bottles or the big, big jars. But if you've got them, there's absolutely, I think they're fantastic. As long as, I also find that my kids get very frustrated with opening that. Maybe that's a good thing. Anyone else got any questions? You can just turn your mic on if you want to ask it and you want to chat on the thing. I know I've run a little bit over, so I'm aware of that. Or if you've got any great tips of what you do that works amazingly, that's also very helpful.
No, just a quick one. Yeah, sorry, just one quick one about storing nuts.
Yes.
If you actually covered that, sorry.
No, I didn't go into nuts, but yes. We'll go for it.
I was just going to say, I've got a big plastic, just a Tupperware container, which is probably the 35-year-old one. And so open packets are just inside that. So when I'm making protein balls or whatever, the nuts and things come out in one container.
Yeah, so yeah, I've had people keep their nuts in the fridge, which I don't tend to do, but I guess it all depends on how many you have. If you've got nuts in shells, they'll obviously keep longer. So if there's a reason that we don't have nuts in shells, because it's very tiresome if we're trying to make something with it. I think it's all about the fact that they will go off if exposed to air. So we do need to, they will go stale. And they also can get infestations. So a lidded container that's not too humid. We don't want moisture in there with it. So yeah, a jar or a Tupperware container tends to be better than just sealing the packet, particularly if you're someone who buys, a kilo of nuts at a time like my father does. I hope that helped a little bit. But yes, I have known people to keep nuts in the fridge, and they can actually freeze as well if you're really struggling to keep them. All right.
Hi, Joe, this is Jamie. I have a quick question if we still have time.
Yes.
I wanted to get your thoughts on washing produce when you first bring it home versus point in time when you're going to use it. I find so we get a produce box, so I do it all then, so I know everything I take, it's clean. But I find it's actually, I don't know if it's because it's removing the seal or chemicals or whatever is on it, but it doesn't last as long.
Yeah.
And it tends to go brown.
Yeah. So what actually happens is the evidence for this is that it actually does cause some degradation. So there are natural enzymes which keep the vegetables fresh as well. So if we are washing them, and the reason you're assuming you're washing them is to get, bacteria like E. coli or just pesticides, a lot of people. So I would recommend washing before you use them. I don't wash my produce when I put it away. I know there's been a resurgence of washing with COVID, and that, but the evidence to suggest that people are getting it from anything there is very limited. So washing produce before you put it in can actually do a couple of things. It can remove some of the enzymes around it. It can make it more quickly degrade, and it can actually also just mean you're putting it into, you know, a lot more mold and that environment too. So I would wash it before you use it. And, you know, certainly that's a suggestion, that especially leafy greens are really, once you wash them, you know, it can cause some problems. The flip side of that is if you want to freeze a lot of green vegetables, that they blanch really well first. So if you wanted to freeze something like spinach, it's really great to actually put it in boiling water and then freeze it, because it actually keeps longer. But yes, as counterintuitive as it seems, putting them straight in the fridge and then washing them for use, you've just got to remember to do that. Rice with weevils, do you have to toss? Yes, I'm sorry. Unless you want to eat weevils, because the thing is, once it's there, it's you just can't see where the eggs are, and you know, the weevils particularly, they're really good at laying inside the grain. So yeah, it's and you're also just encouraging more infestation in your pantries. So I don't even know a sustainable solution for rice. I'm sorry for rice throwing out.
Thank you.
No worries. All right.
How about washing? Is it best to wash with just water, or with salt, or with vinegar, as you were suggesting with one of the things?
Yeah. So it depends what you're washing off. So vinegar is really good for just getting rid of mold spores, for things that are really prone to mold spores, like you know, your berries and grapes. A lot of people are wanting to wash off pesticides, and you can get vegetable washers and stuff. I don't use anything like that. I just use water, but you can use a detergent if it's food safe and food grade. I would just use water, and you know, it's particularly if you're buying organic produce, there's a less of a concern. And to be honest, I think you know, you can cause yourself more grief putting other stuff on top of it to wash away the other stuff.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks.
That's all right. Great. I'm sorry we run over a bit, but thanks, Gabby. And we'll send out the recording, and obviously there's still time to register for those couple of other workshops.
Yep. Thank you, Jo. That was absolutely fabulous, and I learnt a lot, and I'm looking at my kitchen and going, oh dear. You could use it as an example of probably what not to do.
There's a reason professional organisers have a job, I guess.
It's fabulous, and I really learned a lot, and I think it'll be great. And so this recording will be available to watch, and we will send the link out to everybody who had registered for this as well. So this is the last in our 4-part series that Jo has been presenting, and we just want to say thank you on behalf of Hunters Hill Council. It was absolutely fabulous series, and I think we all learned a lot through all of them. If you haven't seen the others, if you go to YouTube and go to just look for Hunters Hill Council, there is a workshops playlist there, so you can go and have a look at that and learn all about sustainability and food storage tips, which is fabulous. So we might stop the recording now, and thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Gabby. Thanks, everyone.